Welcome to the Bell Tech Talk segment of the Vertical MRO podcast. This segment takes you into the nuts and bolts of helicopter maintenance. It's about safety, support, and operational readiness. Top priorities for the Bell team. Join us for technical insights and personal stories from the front lines of helicopter maintenance from the industry-leading experts at Bell.
Hey, welcome to the Vertical MRO podcast. This is one of my favorite segments, the Bell Tech Talk segment of the podcast. I've talked about Bell a lot over the course of our podcast and our conversations, and they're huge supporters of Vertical and Vertical MRO, and very thankful for what they've done for our podcast and for the industry as a whole. You know, we talk about the customer service satisfaction surveys that come out every year, and Bell is always at the top of that. So I'd love to pick your guys' brains and figure out, how do you do that? Because it's not easy, right? It's something you guys have done with intentionality, and so yeah, I'm excited to dig into a little bit of that as we talk. Today's conversation is gonna talk about spare parts and kind of some of the supply chain issues that we're currently facing, and how you guys at Bell are kind of navigating through those seas. So with us to have this conversation is Mike and Kurt. If you guys could just give us a snapshot of who you are, what you're currently doing, and how you wound up. And Mike, let's start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, John. So Mike Loeffler, I'm the Vice President of Supply Chain here at Bell. My responsibility here is really twofold. I have the teams that do the strategic sourcing and contracting with our supply base, and then I have the tactical teams that do the PO placement and administration. So a lot of what sometimes characterizes the part chasing activity. So we have teams across North America, here in Texas, up in Canada, and in the Montreal area, down in Mexico, and up in Piney Flats where we do customization. This is my 20th year at Bell, so I've been at Bell for some time. Most of that in various supply chain roles on the military and commercial side of the business. I did a short stint managing the military aftermarket business for about 3 years. So they did give a supplier-facing guy an opportunity to face the customer for a few years. And that was a valuable experience for me.
Yeah, no kidding. And you talk about being there for 20 years. That's amazing. You know, we talk about leadership a lot in the podcast and the importance that has on the overall culture of a company, of an agency. And we talk about is that culture that's developed by the leadership helps to retain folks. And that retention a lot of times is more important than recruitment itself. So the fact that you've been there 20 years speaks volumes about Bell, about the current, culture that you're operating underneath. Really cool that you've been there for that amount of time. Leadership, again, is one of the things I love talking about. So any insight for folks that are listening early on some potential leadership philosophies that you have or that you appreciate?
Well, I think first on the culture thing. So I've had the opportunity to work in a couple other A&D companies, some of the big ones. And I think Bell's unique in a couple of ways. I think first of all, we are a prime, but we're not huge. So we punch above our weight. I mean, our competitors are the Boeings and the Airbuses, and those guys. We compete for talent here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area with big companies like Lockheed Martin. And so, we're big enough to be relevant, to have a little bit of heft, but we're small enough that we all know each other. We work closely. I have the opportunity to work pretty closely with Kurt and the team on the aftermarket side. I spent a lot of time in the factories with the production teams. Decisions are made in a way that are, it's a lot more rapid and that sort of thing. So we kind of have the best of both worlds. And I think that facilitates more of, and maybe it's a little overstatement to say it's a family culture, but it's a very different culture than I've experienced at some of the other aerospace companies.
And that feeling of connection, I feel like super important, Then Kurt, did I catch you off?
Nope, not at all.
Okay. Well, on that, Kurt, thanks for joining us. Had a blast talking to you already. If you could just introduce yourself, what you're currently doing and how you wound up with Bell.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. So Kurt Nielsen, I don't have quite as much time as Mike, but I guess I would fall into that category of a lot of time at Bell because I've got 19 years, so just under Mike.
Wow.
I guess I will have to go check badge dates, but I've really loved every minute of being at Bell. I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of different experiences in a lot of different roles. all the way from manufacturing engineering at Bell to Six Sigma, process improvement in the factories, finance, and in my current role, I'm the director of commercial business operations, biz ops, I guess that for those in the biz. But what that really means is I think probably the most appropriate thing is parts chaser. We do a lot of parts chasing. Mike does a lot of parts chasing. We all do a lot of parts chasing. It's so key to supporting our customers. But I do have responsibility for the spare parts distribution of our commercial business. And I've been in the commercial at Bell for 19 years, as I said, but I really gravitated towards the commercial side of the business. Have worked in the military side as well. I think about 7 or 8 years ago, really was full-fledged into the commercial business and made that decision to gravitate towards here. And I love every minute of it. Love the people we work with, the culture here at Bell. It is a family culture, as Mike said. I love the customers. I love the products, everything about it. So very fortunate.
I think that the internal culture that you guys have developed, you can see how that easily translates into the customer satisfaction surveys when it comes to high ratings there. So I think that it shows through, and that's really cool. Any early inclination for you, Kurt, that you were going to end up in aviation as a young student?
Not at all. First job, actually, a few years before I joined Bell was first job. It was really just me looking around for a job, right? And I was always into aerospace, but to be honest with you, not so much into helicopters. My first job was at Lockheed Martin in the F-35. Watching I grew up when Top Gun hit the movie. Right. Top Gun, the original Top Gun, hit the movie theater. I was at that perfect age and obsessed with jets, but I never really saw a career in it. But was so fortunate to get that first role, and then came over to Bell, kind of a circuitous path, but just being a few years out of college and jumping jobs, and I didn't really even expect to stay here that long, but it sucks you in.
Yeah,
and I think everybody in the rotorcraft industry, most people who stay in the rotorcraft industry anyway, once it sucks you in, it sucks you in.
Absolutely. It's a neat community. You talk about the family culture of Bell. I feel like we have a general, that's the general feeling I have of the rotorcraft community. We're one big family, and I love that, especially in the public safety side of things. You bring up Top Gun, and that was iconic for me as well. I think everyone in our generation saw that movie at least 10 times. And if you didn't dream of being a pilot at some point after watching the movie, I think there's probably something wrong with you or a maintainer or involved in some way in our industry. What's interesting for me is, as I became an adult and did get a chance to become a pilot for the Ontario Police Department, we would take people on flights, and we've had multiple people that were jet pilots, and to hear their perspective on helicopter flight as compared to jet flights is really interesting. A lot of them are they're blown away by helicopter flight, which is pretty cool. So I love our industry and wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. Mike, for you, when you reflect on your youth, did you have an early desire to go into aviation?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I promise we didn't pre-coordinate this, but I'm also a product of the Top Gun generation. So yeah. I started my career in the Navy. I
cool.
wanted to go to Annapolis because I wanted to be a fighter pilot because I'd seen that movie 1,000 times. I was an aerospace engineering major and wanted to go be an astronaut or whatever. And got through my time at the academy, and my vision wasn't good enough to fly at the time, and I wasn't going to sit in the back seat of an aircraft if somebody else landed it on a carrier deck. So I went into the submarine service and went down that path and spent about 8 years in submarines. Just about all of the job offers I got when I left the service were working for power plants, and I wanted to go into aerospace and defense. And I had one offer at an A&D company. And it was in this function I knew nothing about called supply chain. And this would have been before supply chain was a thing. They didn't have supply chain majors at the time. And I knew so little about this. It was at the time, it was Smith's Aerospace was the name of the company. It's since been bought up by GE Aviation Systems, part of that business. But I remember sitting in the very first meeting with a bunch of junior military officers who've been hired out of the service. I knew so little about supply chain. I leaned over to the guy next to me and I said, "What does PO stand for?" And he said, "It stands for purchase order." So that was the level I started at. My intent was to kind of get into the A&D business in some way in supply chain and then transition into whatever, landing gears or something. But after a little bit of time in supply chain, what I found, first of all, I loved the industry. And second, I loved the supply chain function because you didn't just learn about your business, you learned about all the supporting businesses and just the complexity of the supply chain. So getting a chance to work with big companies that, like Pratt and Rolls-Royce and companies that make engines and cockpits, all the way down to the small machine shops that are, cutting metal and foundries and that sort of thing. So it's been I'm in the 20th year of my 6-month rotation in supply chain, and I'm not looking back.
We've got the right people to talk about some of the supply chain conditions that we currently find ourselves in. But before we go into supply chain conversation, I want to go back to your experience at Annapolis. It's always really interesting to me. We took a trip to Annapolis. We took our 2 boys so they could see the campus and hopefully inspire them to pursue that level of education. I feel like it's a true Ivy League education that you're getting. You don't find that level of education, dedication in many places. Can you talk about your experience there briefly and what you liked about being there? I have heard it's a place that you say you're proud to be from. Necessarily the time is maybe difficult there, but it's an amazing place.
Part of my intent to go there, desire to go there was, I didn't want my parents to have to pay for college. That's part of it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, so the service sounded interesting to me. I was not particularly disciplined, I don't think, as a kid, and so having the structure that an academy or that type of experience provided, I think was useful for me. Maybe not for everybody, but it was helpful for me. A lot of people felt like it was overbearing and your life was overprescribed and every minute was accounted for. But for me, it was a good thing because it kept me focused. I think what's interesting about the academy is you're learning the academic stuff, but you spend a lot of time focused on leadership and learning about leadership in the context of the military. And that was really very interesting for me. You get exposed to leadership experiences as a kid, kind of put in a position where you have to do, leadership stuff. You learn leadership as a discipline, and it's quite interesting. And you also have opportunities to kind of experience different aspects of the service as you go through the academy. So it's basically putting what you learn into practice through your 4 years while you're there. So you have an opportunity to go fly, you have an opportunity to serve aboard ship, you have an opportunity to go out on submarines and go run through the field with the Marines and shoot at things and learn about that before you have to decide what you want to do with the rest of your life. So it's kind of like it's kind of like a trade school to be honest. It's not like a traditional university experience, but it was the right thing for me to have done, and I'm blessed to have had that opportunity for sure.
Yeah, how cool. One thing that struck me as we toured the campus was one that was highly regimented, like you talked about. But the one thing that the tour guide talked a lot about was some of the shenanigans that take place on campus, some of the rituals. I don't know if you have a minute to talk about, one of them is the statue that they put, was it some sort of grease all over, and you got to climb to the top of the statue as a freshman, I believe. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So climbing Herndon. So you go through plebe summer and then you go through your plebe year, and as a plebe, you basically, your head shaved and you have to call everybody sir, and you have to always look ahead. You cannot look out, away from where it's really a very regimented thing. And as you complete your plebe year, you go through this thing. You go through Herndon. So Herndon is this kind of tall monolith. It's one of the statues on campus, but it's just this tall kind of plinth-looking thing. They cover it in grease, and then they let the freshman class all converge on this thing, and then they have to make this human pyramid, and they have to take a plebe cover, a hat, off the top and replace it with the combination cover, which is what you get as a midshipman. And it kind of symbolizes you having completed your plebe year. You have all sorts of fantastic privileges, like being able to call people by their first name and be able to leave the campus for more than 12 hours at a time. But it's just kind of this fun mob scene kind of thing where but it's symbolic. So it's a good time. Our class got very close to doing it in record time, and just kind of the pyramid crumbled at the very last minute, and it ended up taking us a long time to get it done.
Yeah, that's wild.
The legend is the midshipman who pulls the plebe cover off of Herndon is supposed to be the first one to make admiral in the class.
Wow, that's cool. And the other thing that I find interesting is the mascot stealing that takes place between you guys and Army.
Yeah, Army Week is a special thing. I could probably talk for the whole podcast about that. Some of it I wouldn't want recorded. But yeah, there's all sorts of hijinks that happens. I mean, the other thing that's interesting is it's not just at the academies. I mean, it bleeds over into the services, and we're pretty close to DC, so you see some crazy things that happen, like at the Pentagon and stuff like that. People stealing uniforms and that sort of thing. So it's pretty interesting. One of the stories, and again, I don't know if this is true. It didn't happen for our class, but one of the legends is, it's a campus, but it's also a military base. So there's military artifacts all over the yard. You've been there, John. You've seen it. So there's an old A4 fighter jet, kind of Vietnam era fighter jet, on campus, and they managed in the middle of the night to kind of roll this thing across and put it in the middle of Tecumseh Court. I don't know how that happened, and I'm sure that the DoD police were probably part of that. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. But all sorts of interesting stories like that for Army.
That's funny.
Notice Mike says they. He didn't.
I studied and slept, and I was
plausible deniability.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know about you, Kurt, but I didn't experience anything like that at my university. A little different.
Yeah, not quite. I got my undergrad at Texas Tech University in engineering, and there's definitely some. I mean, we're the university that is probably the worst football fans to play against, I guess. Throwing tortillas on the field, and but yeah, nothing like that.
That's wild. I love it. Well, again, getting back to the conversations surrounding the current state of the supply chain, Mike, can you kind of walk us through kind of your version of where we sit with the supply chain, and if you guys could just talk about Bell and what you guys are doing to help your customers navigate that current climate?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with a little bit of the state of the union and the supply chain, and then I guess, Kurt, I'll turn it over to you on the customer side. So I guess the first thing I'd say is there are some parts of the aerospace and defense supply chain that's just inherently vulnerable, right? I mean, these programs have long life cycles. The 505, for example, that has dynamic components that trace back to the 206 and before the 412. You keep me honest on this, Kurt. I think type certification was in like the 80s, and it's based on a Huey era. Vietnam era Hueys. So you've got these designs that were based on half-century old manufacturing technologies, really heavily dependent on artisanship and technical expertise in the supply chain. Aerospace products are also kind of characterized by like lots of sole source components. So you design a particular component onto an aircraft, and then to change suppliers, it has implications around the kind of requalification and everything else. So there are just some barriers to moving from one supplier to another. So the supply chains have some vulnerabilities. And when we went into the pandemic, that not only did it expose some of those vulnerabilities, but it also did some lasting damage. So people kind of assume, hey, we're through COVID, that's all done, we're good. But some of that lasting damage, it still persists today. I would say that aerospace supply chains are challenged. There is challenges. I've seen them now. We saw a lot of that skilled labor leave the workforce. So that welder at that foundry that knew how to weld up every old casting just decided to hang it up. Or, I had a conversation last year with one of our bearing suppliers who said at one of their factories, they had a 50% attrition rate at one of their factories. So skilled labor, particularly in the kind of lower tiers of our supply chain, has been a challenge. And then capacity. We did see a lot of suppliers just exit the industry. So, you have these companies, particularly these, I'll say, smaller outfits that may be in the lower tiers of the supply chain that provide some specialized processing capability, or they're doing work like casting work is a good example, where they just didn't have the scale to survive the economic conditions of the pandemic. So they just decided to close their doors. So we do see a lot of those challenges persist. I was looking at our current production challenges. We do monthly reviews with the commercial programs team. And if I had to boil down, I mean, as most companies in our position have, we have thousands of part shortages that we're chasing. And if I had to boil them down, there's forecastings, 3 bearings, a handful of forgings, and then a bunch of other kind of one-off stuff. And if you look at something like an engine, for example, we're struggling to get engines delivered from all the engine OEMs, and they trace their challenges back to the same things that we're struggling with. We can't get engines because the engine suppliers can't get forgings or bearings because the forging and bearing suppliers are struggling to get raw material from the domestic mills. So we have kind of gone through this period where, lead times have been on this growth trajectory. What was 3 months became 6 months, became 9 months. And that manifests in just, it's more difficult to get spare parts like rotor mass and that sort of thing has been a challenge for us. And it has cascaded, all the way through the supply chain. The good news is, we have the ability to plan and account for that. It's just, I have bearings. I have a bearing that has over 1,000-day lead time. So you can imagine the time it takes to recover from that kind of a situation and to get ahead of it. So, not sure if that answers the question, but I would say from a supply chain perspective, it's just we're seeing some areas of the supply chain that are really, really, really strained.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of highlights the importance of maintenance forecasting more than ever, and I think it's a lot of people are considering that. But sociologically, I think it'll be really interesting as we go to look back at COVID and see, it doesn't matter what segment of the economy you're talking about, but why and how some of the things that have happened, like you're describing it, have happened. You've got a lot of the quiet quitting that took place, just the shifting in the labor force. People realizing there's opportunities to go from one place to the next. So it'll be interesting, I think, as we go down this path to look back and kind of start connecting the dots. I think we're starting to see that now, but as you describe it, I think a lot of it comes back to just the overall employment. People not being present in a lot of these manufacturing facilities to create the parts that are needed for any segment. And we see that in aviation because that's where we live. But for you guys, I guess, Kurt, this will be for you. When you guys help the customers navigate this current supply chain environment, how do you guys do that in a way that's effective and efficient?
Yeah, the importance of forecasting is really important. Although, with everything that Mike said, and I fully have experienced this, it's not the forecast from the customer really doesn't help. I know I've had a lot of customers that are a lot of just industry, people talking to me that saying the reason for this is there's something for, behind corporate, culture or, not wanting to keep inventory. I mean, that's, yes, we're a business. That's always really been the case. But that's really not the problem. And so therefore forecasting, I'm forecasting. That's part of the function of my team is forecasting for the customer base as a whole, well inside those lead times, because there's no way I could expect. I think, Mike, you said the bearing was, the bearing supplier saying 1,000 days. There's no way I could expect a customer to do that. So forecasting certainly does help. It helps the customer. It doesn't necessarily help us get the part necessarily, because my forecast was, we were already forecasting. It's late supply because of all those reasons that Mike mentioned is really what is the crux here. So anyway, getting to help, how do you help the customer? We've had to find, this is a bit generic, but saying finding, creative solutions. To be a little bit more specific, some of the things we've done is recognize that, we may have a higher assembly, and we may not have the detail part within that higher assembly. And while I usually don't offer up a brand new hub when somebody's looking for a pitch link bearing, I have parted out assemblies. That was how we kind of started through this. That was kind of phase one is I can find you a solution, and that's one example of finding a solution. But then as things persist more, I mean, of course, we try to see where we're most vulnerable. We leverage pretty heavily on being able to do expanded repairs, and expand, and no pun intended, expanding upon the offerings there. But so there's a variety of things that we do. I think that it's really, though, what's different about Bell. I'm not necessarily trying to compare us to other OEMs, but it really is the culture. We want to have customers succeed. They have a mission. We take that mission very, very seriously, and I think that's how we're most successful as an OEM is just putting that customer first. So AOGs, I'm always impressed. And when I got over to this commercial side of the business and started having the more customer facing role, realized that I was just shocked at the way this industry, helicopter operators and maintainers, truly want to help each other out, right? So, but being able to, when they're not AOG, even though they need the part, and I've got a limited amount to distribute, I usually like to have those conversations, have my team have those conversations of what's really critical, because it's not that we usually don't have anything for a while. It's just that the supply rate is not enough, right? And being able to move those chess pieces has, I credit our customers a ton with being able to really keep people in the air when we have been able to.
Yeah, that going back to talking about the community that we live within in the rotorcraft community. I remember multiple times at my agency, us having to place a call to another agency that's nearby, asking if they have a particular part. And not only did they have it, but they would either fly it to us or they'd have somebody drive it to us if we couldn't fly it there ourselves and pick it up. So everyone's willing to bend over backwards to help each other, which is part of this community that I absolutely love. Yep. Bell, I feel like we've got a full team that's really interested in ensuring the customers succeed. Can you talk about the team dynamic that's involved in that customer success? It's, there's so many parts to that equation when it comes to the team. Can you kind of go through that a bit?
Absolutely. That's really key to our culture. And it's to me, it is a competitive advantage that Bell has, because of the way we treat but it's that team dynamic that I think everybody tries to create this, but it's very, very difficult to actually achieve. But I mean, truly within Bell, this relationship between CSE, so that's the customer support engineers, the customer facing engineers who are out there doing visits, PSE, who's similar type role, but more, in the office, and then my spare support team and Mike's supply chain team, just that common interaction. And, I guess going a little bit of how do we have that? What is that culture here? Having been at Bell for 19 years, one of the very first things, I tell this story sometimes. My first day, they put you through this orientation where you're going through, they're showing you your insurance and things like that. And one of the things that really stuck with me was, and by the way, so this was in a basement of a building which is no longer there. It's a parking lot now, almost 20 years later. But they talked about what an AOG is, and that I was probably 20, 25ish at the time. For a 25-year-old kid to hear about that was one thing that really resonated with me, and I think has stuck around. And so if you can maintain that culture along with that interaction of the team all throughout Bell, and I mentioned some of the functions there, but it really goes throughout Bell. If everybody has that culture, you're putting the customer first and you're finding solutions, and you realize that is the most important thing we can do for our business and for our customers.
Yeah, and again, going back to the customer satisfaction surveys, it's not just you guys saying that this is what we try and do, but it's visible through the survey results. So I think that's huge to point out. Mike, I think I cut you off there.
No, I was just going to weigh in on that. So just on your point, John. So we had the opportunity to have a conversation with one of our customers just last week. They were interested in establishing some direct discussion with the Bell supply chain folks and just kind of understand what we had going on. And some of the feedback we got after that call was that that same customer had conversations with other helicopter OEMs. And in that conversation, the people from that company were introducing themselves to one another in that call. And that just is so foreign to me, because to Kurt's point, I mean, we probably talk 2-3 times a week. There's Kurt sits in a different building, but I'm over at the commercial business center frequently. Kurt's over here, and our teams talk regularly. And I think in terms of being able to support a customer in an environment where we are hand to mouth on a lot of parts, that just requires a level of communication and transparency. It can't be a knife fight, right? Production needs parts, spares needs parts, supply chain's trying to figure out what to prioritize and what not. Kurt can't go in and load more than he needs earlier than he needs it in an effort to make sure he gets his. We're not in that space. And there's enough communication within this group that I think we do a really good job of keeping the important stuff important. The other thing I would say on the supply chain side, part of why I'm so passionate about the company, and I think this cascades into the team as well, is there's this appreciation not just for the technology and the products and everything else, but the missions that the products are performing. And there's been a couple of stories that resonate with me. We did a leader summit a few years ago, and we had a testimonial from one of our interns who was here working as an intern and had gotten a full-time offer, but was out driving in West Texas. They were going out to Big Bend National Park, and it's a long drive out there. There's nothing out there. Unfortunately, one of the guys fell asleep at the wheel. They drove off the road. The truck flipped. Wow. The kid was kind of thrown from the car, was severely injured, and was ferry flighted to a trauma center in a life flight that was a Bell helicopter. And in his testimonial, he's telling a story about how he wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the products that Bell produces. And he has the distinct honor of working for the company that literally saved his life. Wow. Which it's hard to, if you're not inspired by that story, yeah. I don't know how to help you. So I think it's that connection with the mission when our team is out there trying to chase parts and work to address some of these issues. It's not just because we're chasing the dollar. It's because there's this commitment to the mission that the company helps to support, that our customers fulfill. Yeah, the mission.
Right. Go ahead, Kurt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but something Mike just said. You can't be successful at that mission I mentioned if you're just chasing the dollar. So an example of something that we've done multiple times where I don't know if you guys know 212 blades are a problem, have been for some time. The industry knows that. Everybody who's listening, who's looking for 212 blades will know that. In fact, I was shocked last year when, that my internal network, somebody had shared, hey, I found an owner of some 212 blades that has 0-time 212 blades on the shelf, and I think he'll sell them. Wow. Which I was shocked at that point that there were still some on the market that somebody had been holding on to for a couple of years. I love hearing those situations because, as much as I would like to have that 212 blade on the shelf to sell somebody who just had a strike that was unplanned and wasn't planning on having to replace their 212 blades, that's the very first phone call I make to try to and offer them to at least shake hands. There's nothing in that for me other than the fact that I'm helping somebody out and helping one of our customers. And when those types of situations come up, that's how we try to best serve our customer. It's not a financial gain for me at all, but I'm so happy to make those connections, especially when I'm unable to.
Yeah. You guys are committed to the mission. That's for sure. I keep talking about how much I love our community, but the helicopter community is surrounded by missions. I think every segment of the industry has a particular job that they're doing. And a lot of that's life-saving missions, which, I absolutely love. And all the stories that we talk about, like the one you illustrated, Mike, illustrate how critical helicopter operations are and how critical, we talk about spare parts and then having that availability. It illustrates how critical it is to have a network available that can provide those spare parts so these life-saving missions can take place. For me as a consumer, when we need a part, I'm like, okay, let's get in touch with, in this case, let's say Bell, and let's order the part. So in my mind, it's like magic land. I press a button and the part gets shipped. but I know there's a huge network and there's all kinds of logistics that go into that. And it's really interesting to me. You talk about technology and all the things that you guys are harnessing to make that distribution better for the customer and more efficient as a company. Can you talk about the distribution of spare parts from your perspective, just like in an overview kind of way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a team. First, I would say it starts there with a bunch of very diverse but all talented individuals. So diverse skill sets in technical team, logistics team, people who are expert in manufacturing and statistical forecasting, as well as the support and sales side. So it kind of starts with from birth to end. How did that part get on the shelf or not be on the shelf for when a customer needs it? It starts with that provisioning team that says these are the spare parts that this is how we're going to provision to support the aircraft at this level, and what's the right configuration, and a lot of statistics, smart people that are using historical as well as collected data on the on how many we need to have on the shelf. Combining that with lead times, right? So that we are forecasting 1,000 days, sometimes longer than that in advance to try to forecast over that period and always adjusting that. So it's a pretty good system that we have as long as the lead times are consistent. While there's always going to be some error there, and that's what that's normally like a statistical error that you're accounting for variations in demand, not necessarily variations in supply. That's the thing that you can add safety stock for, but it's not really designed for that. Of course, that's a piece of safety stock you would say that you're buffering for, but not something extreme like that. But then from us loading into demand where we've essentially ordered the part so that it is on the shelf. That's where Mike's team takes over. Mike's team, or it's not usually just one team, or so you can't just say we just buy a part. It's procuring the raw materials to build a blade, for example, that we actually build in house. So that after that procurement and fabrication is done, a little bit more into the how we distribute spares. We do have a Fort Worth here in Fort Worth, just down the street from me, is our central distribution center. Everything comes into there for spares. And then we geographically position it at one of our supply centers around the world to where it's most likely to be consumed. Of course, there's flexibility there, if especially in situations of shortages. We can order we can move stuff around to recreate that balance of where parts are needed, or even drop ship in the case of an AOG, or to get a part there faster, drop ship it from, I may not have it for a customer in the US who would normally like to order it directly from Fort Worth, but order it from Singapore or Amsterdam or Calgary, if it's located there. I guess the other big piece of our distribution network, I can't leave out the CSF network. Our CSF network is key to Bell, and you usually don't use the word partner. Legal always gets mad at me when if I incorrectly use the word partnership, it usually has a negative connotation or a legal connotation. In this case, they are covered business partners, and our CSF network, I can't say enough great things about them and what they do to support the customer, stock spare parts, do forecasting for those customers, so that the party's either on our shelf or their shelf when they need it. And as far as managing through shortages, that's where it becomes really tough. When I don't have something, or enough of something, that's when that process of us trying to prioritize. Well, who had the oldest order? Who's in most dire need? And that's where this manual allocation of shortage parts comes into play. And we try to do the best we can there. Inevitably, it's a shortage situation. You can't. It's physically impossible to help to satisfy everybody. But we try to find another alternative if we can.
Yeah. Again, the logistics involved in what you're describing is mind blowing to me. Mike, I'm curious how your background at the Naval Academy and then in the Navy in general kind of blends into that. Because, when you think of military operations, logistics is the first thing that comes to mind with the things that are necessary to support military operations. Can you talk about how your background helps kind of support what we're talking about here?
Well, I think the what Kurt's described, and actually the role that Kurt's in is analogous to a role that I previously had at Bell on the military aftermarket side. And I think what's different about supporting the military sustainment part of our business is essentially have one customer, and that's the DoD, and they're all of their repairs and all their spares and all that sort of stuff is going to flow through us. So we have PBL type, performance-based logistics type contracts in place for blades and gearboxes and that sort of thing. It's a little bit trickier on the commercial side. It's a more diverse fleet, and it's kind of a more complex network. But the basic concept is, how much demand do we think there's going to be, and how can we position the business to be able to get ahead of and support that demand? So it does come down to the smart people that are trying to figure out and to develop the forecast and figure out how much to stock and where to position that stuff, to have that connectivity with the customer for technical support and so forth. But the whole system was designed around trying to deal with fluctuations in demand, but it assumed a level of reliability on the supply side that has not been the case for the last several years. So not to oversimplify, but you mentioned technology and systems and that sort of thing, John, that we have complex systems that do a lot of math. We have MRP systems and everything else that make certain assumptions around product lead times and try to figure out what our production needs are and what attrition rates are going to be and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it assumes it's this very tightly coupled system that says, I'm going to start building this gearbox on this day, so I need the casting on that day, and it's going to show up because the lead time is this. When those assumptions start to fall apart, when every time you go solicit a supplier for a lead time, it's longer than the last time you solicited it, so the system lead time isn't accurate, or if your delivery performance from a supplier now is 50% instead of 95%, that the system becomes inherently unreliable. So Kurt's team makes certain assumptions around the supply side of this. Our system makes certain assumptions, and those assumptions prove to not be true. So then we find ourselves as a business trying to figure out, how do we account for that risk? So how do we take more of a risk-based approach to, okay, let's assume that the lead time is going to be longer than what the system says it is, or let's assume that the supplier has got about a 50% chance of delivering on time. That completely changes how you do business on the back end of the business. So that's some of the stuff that we're trying to do is figure out, okay, and I hate to use the term hedging because it's more complex than that, but trying to be selective about, if we see at-risk categories like bearings and forgings and gear steel and castings, there are things that we can do to maybe be more aggressive about getting ahead of those product lead times and all that. And so and that certainly was true on the military side of our business, and it's the case on the commercial side of our business. So we're doing a lot of that now. We're changing how we schedule the work, how we buy parts. Another thing we're trying to go after is the raw material side of this. Is there a way for us to change the way that we approach purchasing raw material? I would much rather be sitting on a little bit of inventory. I hope our CFO isn't listening to this podcast. I'd rather be sitting on a little bit of inventory of bar stock than to be sitting on, aircraft that can't be completed because they don't have all the parts that they need. And so we're adjusting that equation as well.
Yeah, I think what you guys are describing is interesting, because in aviation, we're always talking about risk management, and I guess the same thing kind of comes into play here. You're looking at how do we create redundancies to where if there's some kind of geopolitical turmoil somewhere in the world that is responsible for producing a certain part or a certain raw material, how do we then compensate for that? So it sounds like you guys have put a lot of effort and energy into coming up with redundancies and kind of addressing some of the vulnerabilities that potentially exist in the global supply chain, which I think is fascinating, because again, there's so many things in the world when it comes to employment, supply chains, all these things that you just cannot account for, a lot of which is the social side of things. So I think that's really interesting that you guys have looked at it in that way. When you look kind of broadly, at the industry, what kind of observations or trends do you see that are starting to take shape?
I think that, I have seen, there's a lot of customers that I talk to every day who will consistently say, I'm not experiencing a problem. Those are sometimes the customers. I did say, forecasting and doing a good job of planning for events well in advance. And I know that's not as easy said and done, for especially for some of the smaller operators. Those who have done that are, I'm consistently seeing them, not to say they don't really have any problems, but I'm seeing them come out of this a lot better. In terms of, they may be getting a little antsy at times, but they have a backup plan already. And if I can help support that backup plan with something else, they're able to find some of those solutions or dig into something. Sometimes it's maybe not the most efficient thing in the world to put on something that has 50 hours left on it. It requires more maintenance certainly, but it keeps them flying for that much longer. So what do I see going on in the industry there from a consumer perspective? I think that, some of the ones who've been successful and in doing that and have figured out that recipe will continue to get to be successful. And those who haven't, unfortunately, of course, we're still trying to help everyone out, but it's becoming more and more challenging to help those people out.
I think kind of going with the observations and trends, when you look at what's happening politically and economically throughout, not just the United States, but throughout the world, you can see the impact that potentially has on operations as a whole, from the business side and also, from a mission readiness point of view. So I think it's, again, kind of one of those things that, as much as we try to control the industry, a lot of things are just out of our hands. But I feel like at Bell, again, you guys have done a really good job of trying to mitigate some of those political and socioeconomic risks associated with kind of what we're talking about. Can you guys just, I know we've talked about a lot of it already, but kind of just go through some of the things that you guys are doing, some of the key efforts that you guys have undertaken to ensure that the customers are receiving the spare parts or have access to the spare parts that they might need?
So I'll jump in, John. I guess first, just to touch on the kind of the dynamic geopolitics today. Obviously things like tariffs, for example, we're wrestling with. I would like to use resources to go out and find new and better suppliers and to work technical issues with, but instead we spend a lot of time chasing, harmonized tariff schedules and costed bills of material and USMCA eligibility certs and this sort of thing, trying to figure out how this is going to evolve. And I will say, as a supply chain guy, obviously I'm concerned about the economic implications of import taxes. I think there also is the potential for some disruption. So just as an example, I mentioned domestic mills, their capacity constraints in the supply chain. I'm very much in favor of localizing supply chains. I'm very much in favor of domestic production. Our supply chain is largely North American centric, so that's good. That's good for us. But it doesn't turn on a dime, right? It takes a while to do that. And in the meantime, the risk is that you get a run on the bank, right? So you've got these domestic capacity constrained domestic suppliers that are seeing longer lead times, and suddenly we're putting more demand on that, and that has the potential to exacerbate an already constrained situation. So those are the types of things that we're keeping a close eye on. In terms of what we're trying to do to continue to support customer needs. Again, I mentioned some of it. I think if we can get ahead of some of these items that have been constrained, get a running start, be a little bit more aggressive about trying to account for these growing lead times. We have, in many cases, developed 2-3 sources of supply for constrained parts, so that we're not vulnerable to one source of supply, and that takes time and investment. But we're certainly doing that. We're looking at things, we talked about 212 blades. We talked about some of this, I'll say, the heritage work, this legacy work that is frankly based on older manufacturing methods. When you lose the guy that's been welding these castings up for the last 50 years and he decides to retire, you suddenly start experiencing producibility issues. So we are looking at, are there more modern ways that we can manufacture some of these things? Are there modern manufacturing methods and that sort of thing? So we're taking a bunch of different approaches. It's not just about buying more stuff and buying it earlier. It's about trying to figure out how to reduce the single point safe situations in the supply chain and go after and tackle some of the technical challenges.
Yeah, 3D printing blades is pretty much off the table, but I wouldn't say it's off the table. I mean, we have explored and in some cases used 3D printing on for some a lot less crucial parts, right? And it still requires quite a bit of qualification there. But as Mike said, I see our products being able to we're gonna be supporting them for years. There's no doubt about that. The demand is there. Bell's commitment is there. We have to find a better way and are looking for better ways to be able to do that. Nothing's really completely off the table except for 3D printed blades. We're not going there yet.
I mean, you talk about technology, and it's one of the exciting conversations for me because it can highlight things that were problematic in our industry and come up with solutions for those problems. Utilizing technology. AI is something that's really interesting to me to see how it'll affect, supply chain issues, lead times, all the things that we deal with in our industry. So I do love the conversation on technology. I think it's awesome. Kind of in closing, I think one thing we've highlighted throughout the whole conversation outside of supply chains and spare parts is this idea of community. We're dealing with a severe shortage in recruitment, whether you're, again, a maintainer, a pilot, air traffic controller, it doesn't matter what the position is within our community. But can you give some advice for a young listener who might be listening to this conversation and just give them some advice on, things that they should do as they prepare to, or maybe they're inspired to go into aviation, but something that they could do to kind of elevate their career as a young person?
I would say, speaking from our customer perspective or from a maintainer's perspective, no matter what your role is, I guess this gets back to a little bit of a trend I've seen, where some positions are have become a little bit more genericized by some, or generalized by some smaller businesses where no matter what your function is, it's so important to know about the product and have the network, right? If you're a buyer for spare parts, it's easy. It could be easy for a maintenance provider, an MRO provider, to hire somebody for that buyer role with no experience, which everybody has no experience coming into the industry at some point. But learn from those who are still there, and not just the people in that procurement role, but also from go out to the shop. Understand the parts that you're buying, because I think that there's a little bit of knowledge lost when that happens, when you're just hiring somebody for a role because they've bought bicycles before in the past.
Right.
If you're hiring for those roles, then you're going to get somebody who's processing paperwork. Whereas, some of the closest relationships, well, it's easy for me to say this, I'm on the parts side of the business, but are with the procurement people, and I've seen some of those who have such extensive knowledge of where to go get certain things, of substitutes, who know the tech pubs in and out, and who are able to navigate through those solutions. That makes it really easy for me to help provide a solution when the buyer is actually finding that solution on their own or proposing alternatives. So getting to know everything into the industry. We've said it. This industry really sucks you in. It sucked all of us in on some level.
Yeah.
So if you're new into this, no matter what your role is, get to know the specifics of the industry, and I think that's natural. If you have a love for aviation, I'll even get more focused on rotorcraft, right? In the helicopter industry, if you have a love for that, it's really super easy, and it doesn't seem like a job at all. You should go out there and interface with as many people as you can.
Yeah,
That's the only way to get that knowledge.
I 100% agree. I think networking is such an important part of your career. A true understanding of the community as a whole, like you talked about. It's easy to be focused on the one particular thing that you're doing, the one mission set that you're doing. I think it's really important to go to these larger conferences. This is actually a easy or great time for me to talk about the Vertical MRO conference. To be a part of the community, I encourage you to go to a conference like the Vertical MRO conference, talk to other folks who are maybe is experiencing similar problems that you have in a way that you can learn from. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The homework's already been done by somebody else. It's easy just to go and learn from somebody who's already experienced that and come up with some sort of solution that you haven't considered. So networking for me, I think, is a critical part of the career. And I think that's my advice to any young or current maintainer or anybody in our industry is just to really seek out these networking opportunities. So that's my little rabbit hole. Sorry to jump in there, but you brought up a great point, Kurt. I love that. Mike, for you, any advice for young maintainers or folks that are interested in our community?
Well, I think Kurt's point was a really good one, and it's the path I was going to go down. I would say, we talked about the Bell culture. I think there are a lot of folks within Bell, like Kurt, who are generalists, have been exposed to a lot of different parts of the company, so have had an opportunity to take a spin through take a role in the factory, take a role in engineering, take a role in the business capacity, and I think what that provides is really good context to be a capable leader in the business. I think my first piece of advice would be to be open-minded and be willing to take on roles that may be outside of what you might define yourself as a buyer, you might define yourself as an engineer, but be willing to experience a different part of the business, because doing that does give you that broader context, not just of the business, but of the product. So I think you have a lot of credibility in the business if you understand the product. If you're a buyer and you're just buying a part number, it's just a widget to you. You don't have as much credibility, and you're not as connected to the product. I think at the end of the day, you have to understand the business and you have to be connected to the product and the mission set. And if you have those things, then you're going to be successful. And that just requires you to have a different mindset than, I went to school, I studied mechanical engineering. My job is to design this bracket, and that's it. That's my life. And I think my advice to young folks, including my kids that are in college, is be open-minded and expose yourself to different parts of the business. So,
yeah, love that. And a lot of leaders like yourselves that I've heard talk about their successful careers have talked about accepting new challenges and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's kind of what you're talking about. I think when you decline a challenge, you really limit your growth as an individual, and I think it's important to always be looking for the next challenge. How do I evolve my career? How do I make myself more effective and efficient in the role that I currently hold? Because you never know how that kind of leads into the next position that you're going to hold. When you look back sometimes in the rearview mirror, like, oh, I can do what I'm doing now because of these 3 things I did previously. But you don't always know that in the moment. So I love the points that both of you brought up on that. Thank you guys for, again, your support of the Vertical MRO podcast, the Vertical Hellcast platform, and just what you guys do for the overall community. You guys are a huge part of our community. Super thankful for you guys, and look forward to seeing you guys hopefully at the Vertical MRO conference, if not there, somewhere nearby soon.
Thanks, Jon.
Thanks.
All right, we'll catch you later.
Thanks for listening to the Bell Tech Talk segment of Vertical MRO Podcast. We want to hear from you. Have a technical topic for the team or a favorite technical tip? Let us know. Our email is techtalk@bellflight.com. That's TECHTALK @bellflight.com. If you're having a technical issue with the aircraft, as always, our team is here 24/7 at product support@bellflight.com. If you like what you heard, subscribe and come back for more.